his mother, Charlotte, was on her deathbed, she told him something startling. Jean-Marie knew that his father was a German soldier, but had no other details. However, Charlotte confessed that his father had been none other than Adolf Hitler.
I have just left Germany, and Adolf Hitler, I personally have no time for. I believe that Hitler's policy in Europe will not bring any benefit to the human race.
He lived his whole life in silence, carrying a name that meant nothing until one day he opened a locked drawer. Inside were old letters, strange documents, and a secret his mother swore to take to her grave. That secret? She claimed his father was Adolf Hitler. This man, Jean-Marie Loret, was a French soldier who once fought against the Nazis without knowing he might share blood with the man who led them. Was he truly Hitler's son, or just a victim of wartime confusion and rumor? His shocking confession before death left historians stunned and reopened one of history's darkest mysteries. And this story all began with Charlotte Lobjoie, the woman who met Hitler, Charlotte's dark secret. Charlotte Lobjoie was just a young village girl when the war changed everything. She was 16, living in the small town of Fournes-en-Wep in northern France, helping her mother with farm work and doing what little she could to stay out of the way of the German soldiers occupying the area. Life was hard, food was scarce, and fear was constant. But nothing could have prepared her for the strange connection she would form with one of those soldiers. A man she would later tell her son was Adolf Hitler. Charlotte first noticed him during one of her walks. He sat alone in a field, sketching furiously into a notebook. Unlike the other soldiers who laughed, smoked, or harassed locals, this young man kept to himself. He wore a distant look, and his eyes were sharp and almost angry, even in silence. Something about him pulled her in. They began crossing paths often. He never smiled. Instead, he would rant in sharp German words she barely understood. He seemed obsessed with the history of his homeland, especially Bavaria and Prussia. Sometimes he would hand her one of his drawings, pictures of buildings, cities, and strange symbols. He talked about Germany rising again, about betrayal and revenge. She didn't grasp much, but she could tell this wasn't just a soldier. This was burning with something darker. Charlotte didn't know what to call what they had. It wasn't love. He never treated her gently. He never asked about her dreams, her fears, or her life. He used her silence like a blank canvas, dumping his anger and hopes into the air around them. Their walks often ended with him pacing, still talking, while she stood off to the side, confused. She later described him as cold, obsessive, and unpredictable. Sometimes he was rough. Other times, he would fall into a strange silence and disappear for years. When she found out she was pregnant, panic took over. Her family was ashamed, and the village began to whisper. Charlotte was quickly sent away to give birth in secret. No one must know a German soldier had fathered her child. Jean-Marie was born in 1918, just after the war ended. The German she had fathered a child with was gone, and she was told to forget what happened. But she never truly did. Years passed, and Charlotte worked as a dancer. She kept her secret locked inside, watching the world change around her. Then came the 1930s. She started recognizing the man from her younger years as an older man giving speeches from podiums, saluted by millions. Her heart sank when she saw the newspapers. It was him, the man from the field, the one who had gotten her pregnant. She was certain. She told no one, not until 1950s, shortly before her death. By then, the war was over. He was long dead, and her son was a grown man. She called him close and said the words she had carried for over 30 years. Your father was not just any man. He was Adolf Hitler. It broke her to say it. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She only wanted him to know the truth, that he was not born from love, but from a moment in history no one could have imagined would matter so much. Her son was Jean-Marie Loret, Hitler's secret son. Jean-Marie Loret, the boy without a father. Jean-Marie Loret was born in March 1918 in the small French town of Seboncourt. From birth, his life was shaped by a mystery, as he had no father listed on his birth certificate. His mother, Charlotte, claimed only that the father had been a German soldier. In those days, that alone was enough to mark a child, and in Jean-Marie's case, it left behind a shadow that followed him everywhere. For the first 7 years of his life, Jean-Marie lived with his maternal grandparents in Fournes-en-Wep. But this was no warm family setting. He later recalled that his grandparents treated him harshly. His mother moved away to Paris shortly after his birth, cutting off contact with her family and leaving the boy behind. She eventually married a man named Clément Loret in 1922. Clément agreed to take on her son and allowed the boy to use his surname, Loret. But by the time Charlotte reappeared in Jean-Marie's life, her son had already been emotionally wounded. He carried the label of being born out of wedlock. Worse, whispers followed him, and he was tagged the son of a Boche. This was a cruel insult in post-war France aimed at children whose fathers had been German soldiers. This insult followed him through school and made him feel like an outsider. His background was a source of shame, even though he didn't understand the full story. After his grandparents died in the mid-1920s, Jean-Marie's aunt, Charlotte Lobjoie, tried to give him a better life. She arranged for him to be adopted by the wealthy Frison family, who owned a construction business in Saint-Quentin. From there, Jean-Marie was sent to Catholic boarding schools in Cambrai and Saint-Quentin. While his material conditions improved, the emotional wounds of his early years remained. He still had no answers about his father. As he grew older, Jean-Marie tried to create a normal life for himself. In 1936, at 18, he joined the French army, where he worked his way up to staff sergeant. But fate had a twisted sense of humor. After Hitler invaded France in 1940, Jean-Marie joined the French resistance. He operated under the codename Clement and helped fight against the Nazi occupation. What he didn't know at the time was that the man whose ideology and army he was helping to resist might actually have been his biological father. After the war, Jean-Marie worked in various fields. He was briefly a businessman, but his business failed in 1948. He then worked as a school teacher and later as a railroad worker. For years, he lived a quiet life in northern France, raising a family and staying out of the spotlight. But deep down, he always felt there was something missing. He had grown up with questions he never got answers to. Then, one day in the early 1950s, his aging mother told him something that changed his life forever. After years of silence, she finally revealed the identity of his real father. Her words would send him into years of doubt, investigation, and emotional conflict. She told him, "Your father was not just any man. He was Adolf Hitler." The clues that haunted his life. When Jean-Marie Loret's mother, Charlotte, first told him the shocking truth, he didn't believe her. He thought it was some kind of joke, or perhaps the ramblings of an aging woman looking for attention. After all, how could the most infamous dictator in history possibly be his father? But her death left behind more than just grief. It left questions that he could no longer ignore. Something about her final words had unsettled him. A part of him needed to know the truth. So, he began digging. His first stop was the old family home in the French countryside. While going through Charlotte's belongings, He climbed into the dusty attic and found something strange. It was a stack of old, faded paintings. What made them stand out wasn't just the style, but the signature in the corner. Each one bore the initials AH. Charlotte had once told him his father was a German soldier and had been an artist. Could these have been painted by Hitler himself? As he dug deeper, he spoke to old neighbors, friends of the family, and even people who had known Charlotte in her younger days. Their stories only deepened the mystery. Some described her as quiet and private, while others remembered her as emotional, sometimes withdrawn. A few confirmed that German soldiers were seen around her home more than once during the war. More disturbingly, they whispered of strange visitors during World War II. Some neighbors recalled seeing German Gestapo officers coming and going from Charlotte's house. Some said she seemed protected during the Nazi occupation, treated differently from other villagers. There were rumors that she received envelopes with money, though no one knew why. One villager even recalled her being questioned but never harmed when other locals were punished for resisting the Nazis. Jean-Marie began to suspect that his mother may have received financial support, perhaps not out of kindness, but to keep her silent. Could it have been child support? Or hush money from the Nazi regime? The supposed protection could have been due to who he was. Perhaps someone was watching over them, or they were trying to keep his existence secret. The deeper he went, the more haunted he became. He uncovered a stash of letters. Some were too damaged to decipher, but a few were legible. They appeared to confirm that Charlotte Lobjoie had received money from German sources during the war. On one hand, the pieces seemed to fit. On the other hand, the idea was almost too much to bear. The man who destroyed millions, the symbol of evil itself, might have been his own blood. He questioned everything from his identity, his past, even his own memories. Jean-Marie's quiet life as a schoolteacher and railroad worker was now shadowed by an unbearable question. Was he truly the son of Adolf Hitler? The search for truth became his obsession. It offered no peace, only more doubt, and yet he couldn't stop. Because once the door had been opened, the mystery refused to close. Jean-Marie's growing obsession with the truth. After finding the letters and the paintings, Jean-Marie Loret's life was turned upside down. He couldn't ignore it anymore. What if it were true? What if, all along, he had been living in the shadow of a man who started a world war and orchestrated the deaths of millions? The uncertainty became unbearable, and Jean-Marie became consumed by the need to know the truth. This wasn't just curiosity, but an obsession that shaped the rest of his life. He began hiring professionals to help him investigate. Historians, genealogists, handwriting analysts, and anyone who might help him piece together the mystery. One of the experts he contacted was Werner Messer, a respected German historian who had previously written about Hitler's rumored affair with a young French woman during World War I. Messer was intrigued by Jean-Marie's claim World War I began helping him look deeper. Jean-Marie also hired a handwriting analyst to compare his own writing to Hitler's. The results were surprising. There were noted similarities in the way they shaped their letters, especially in certain strokes and patterns. While not solid proof, it added fuel to Jean-Marie's growing belief that his mother had told the truth. He also began examining his own physical traits. He compared old photographs of Hitler to his own reflection from the shape of the jawline, the receding hairline, and the deep-set eyes. He even discovered they shared the same blood type. This made him consult a geneticist from the University of Heidelberg. The expert confirmed that Jean-Marie and Hitler did share the same blood group, though no DNA tests were done at that time to provide a definite match. Still, it gave Jean-Marie more reason to keep digging. The investigation grew deeper and darker. He contacted former German and French intelligence officers, hoping they might have access to old files or wartime reports. What he found shocked him. Several Nazi-era documents mentioned German army officers delivering envelopes of cash to Charlotte Lobjoie during the German occupation of France, possibly hush money or support sent by high command. It is becoming clear that it was possible the Nazis had tried to keep Charlotte quiet. Loret also visited the Hotel Lutetia in Paris, a place known for housing German intelligence operations during the war. There, he claimed he had once been questioned by men he believed were Gestapo agents asking about his mother, his origins, and his background. It struck him as odd then, but now it felt like a clue. He retraced his mother's footsteps, traveling to the small towns she had once lived in, from Fournes-en-Wepes, Wavrin, and others, speaking with aging locals who might have known her during the war. Some recalled strange men in uniforms visiting her. Others remembered whispers, hints that Charlotte had a connection with German officers that went beyond fear or survival. In secret, he even traveled to Germany and met with elderly Nazi sympathizers. Some dismissed his story, others nodded quietly, giving little away but offering a sense that they knew more than they were saying. At night, when the world went quiet, Jean-Marie would stare at Hitler's portrait in silence, sometimes for hours. He would whisper to the image, asking, "Are you really my father?" No answer ever came, but the question haunted him for the rest of his life. The psychological toll and the shame. Jean-Marie Loret's search for the truth came with a price he never expected, one that tore through every part of his life. At first, the idea of being Hitler's son had seemed absurd, but as the evidence grew, so did the weight on his shoulders. What started as a mystery soon turned into a heavy emotional burden that followed him for the rest of his life. Loret slipped into bouts of depression. Friends said he would sometimes sit for hours, lost in thought, barely speaking. He told a few trusted people that when he looked in the mirror, he began to see Hitler's features staring back. The thought haunted him, and even though he had never stepped foot inside a concentration camp, he confessed to having nightmares about them. In those dreams, he was the one behind the gates watching horrors unfold, powerless to stop them. The impact on his family life was just as tragic. His wife, once a pillar of support, began to pull away. She grew scared, not just for him, but for their children. What if Hitler's darkness had passed into their bloodline? That fear poisoned their relationship, turning love into suspicion. In 1975, Jean-Marie finally gathered the courage to tell his 9 children the truth. He described the revelation as violent, a word that captured how deeply it had shaken his sense of identity and his role as a father. But the truth didn't set him free. It shattered the fragile peace in his home. His wife eventually left him. Some of his children distanced themselves too, unsure how to cope with the knowledge that their grandfather might have been one of history's most hated men. Loret became increasingly isolated, retreating from public life and choosing solitude over social contact. He kept writing about his feelings in private letters, many of which were never published. In one painful line, he wrote, "Even if I'm not his son, the world sees me as the child of a monster." It was coming from a man trying to hold on to his own identity while drowning in the shadow of someone else's. The media eventually got hold of the story. At first, Jean-Marie avoided all interviews. He didn't want to fuel the flames, but pressure mounted. People whispered behind his back. Strangers stared too long. The questions never stopped. Was he really Hitler's son? Was he dangerous? Was he hiding something? The emotional cost of searching for the truth was almost unbearable. Whether or not Hitler truly was his father, Jean-Marie paid the price as if it were fact. He carried shame, fear, and sorrow until the day he died. Eventually, he broke his silence and revealed the truth that shocked the whole world. The truth he couldn't keep hidden. After decades of torment, hiding in plain sight and battling shame, Jean-Marie Loret finally broke his silence. The weight had become too much. In the early 1980s, he stepped into the spotlight and shocked the world with a single sentence: "My father is Adolf Hitler." He released a memoir titled "Your Father's Name Was Hitler." In this raw, unsettling book, he laid bare the truth he had carried like a chain around his neck. In its pages, he declared, "Believe it or not is irrelevant. I believe in my mother." That line alone sparked global headlines, debates, and a media frenzy. Jean-Marie had spent his entire Middle Ages wrestling with the possibility, consulting experts, chasing clues, enduring emotional collapse, and losing his family. And now, he was done hiding. In his own words, Loret revealed how he had tried everything to keep the story buried. He had never wanted attention, never sought fame. "I worked non-stop," he said in an interview. "For 20 years, I didn't even go to the cinema." His life, it seemed, had been on hold, entirely consumed by the question of who he truly was and what that meant. But something shifted as he grew older. He realized the burden was not just personal, but historical. In interviews before his death in 1985, Loret explained, "I never wanted this legacy, but the world must know." Speaking with a mixture of sorrow and determination, he described how the truth had stalked him like a ghost. Every mirror was a battlefield. Every glance at his children came with fear. And every article about Hitler brought questions he could no longer push away. By the time he spoke publicly, Loret had already faced deep personal losses. His marriage had crumbled, his friendships had strained, and his mental health had suffered. But now he chose truth over comfort. That public perception was impossible to erase, and so he stopped trying. He leaned into it, hoping that honesty might bring some peace. Still, coming forward wasn't without danger. Loret claimed he had received indirect threats and warnings, he said, likely from ex-Nazi sympathizers who didn't want Hitler's private affairs made public. Yet, he didn't stop. He told interviewers that the truth, no matter how painful, mattered more than silence. It wasn't just emotional. It was deeply personal. Late in life, Loret admitted that one of the hardest truths he ever faced was learning that he had served in the French army during the Second World War, fighting against the German forces led by the very man who may have been his father. "I fought Hitler," he said, "without knowing I was fighting my own blood." He never once regretted serving France. He was proud to have resisted the Nazis. What crushed him was not the act, but the knowledge that he had spent his life in a war not only against evil, but against part of himself. It made the question of identity unbearable. If his enemy was also his father, then what did that make him? And through it all, he never found peace. In the end, what Jean-Marie Loret revealed about his father wasn't just a claim of blood. It was a total rejection of the man himself. Friends said he spoke often with bitterness and disgust. One recalled him saying, "I hate him. He shouldn't have been my father." Another said he described the connection as a curse, something that had poisoned every part of his identity. No one could be proud of that blood, he told them. Some said he believed Hitler had treated him like a mistake to be hidden, not a son to be acknowledged. That, more than anything, stayed with him. He died without closure. DNA evidence remained inconclusive. But the truth he revealed about his father, of hatred, shame, and pain, was final. The evidence and ongoing debate. After Jean-Marie Loret's death in 1985, the questions surrounding his true identity only grew louder. His shocking claim sparked intense curiosity, skepticism, and a wave of investigations. Though he never sought fame, his story became one of the most debated personal mysteries tied to Hitler. And with Loret gone, researchers were left to dig through what he left behind, hoping to settle the truth once and for all. In the years following his death, new evidence surfaced. Perhaps the most controversial was the alleged DNA testing. According to a two-part investigation by French journalist Jean-Marc Leclerc, blood samples from Jean-Marie Loret had been preserved prior to his death and were retrieved by Belgian journalist Marc Vermeuren. These samples were then used for a comparative genetic study. Researchers reportedly analyzed the Y chromosome, a piece of DNA passed virtually unchanged from father to son. To perform the comparison, scientists collected DNA from living male relatives of Adolf Hitler, specifically descendants of Hitler's half-brother, Alois Hitler. The result was a reported Y chromosome match. Since the Y chromosome is passed down the male line with very little change, it suggests a shared male ancestor. That ancestor, by implication, could be Adolf Hitler. Adding to the speculation, Loret's blood type reportedly matched Hitler's. On its own, this meant little. But when stacked alongside other clues like paintings signed A.H. found in his mother's attic, and the fact that German officers were seen visiting her during World War II, it formed a compelling narrative. One where Hitler may have known, or at least suspected, he had fathered a child with the Frenchwoman during his time as a soldier in World War I. There was also the testimony of Heinz Linge, Hitler's longtime valet. In his 1980 memoirs, Linge recounted a strange episode from 1940. Hitler had told his inner circle about a French village that held personal meaning from his World War I days. Not long after, Linge was present when SS leader Heinrich Himmler received a phone call from Hitler himself. Linge left the room briefly, but returned to hear Himmler discussing a woman and her son in the village. Though names were not mentioned, Linge later believed this story aligned with Jean-Marie Loret's account. This might have hinted that Hitler had ordered surveillance or contact with his old flame, Charlotte Lobjoie. German historian Werner Maser also added weight to the case. While doing research in Wavrin, the town where Charlotte had lived, he heard local rumors in 1965 about Hitler's alleged son. Intrigued, Maser traced the stories to Loret and eventually convinced him to go public. Maser would later defend the story in articles and interviews, insisting it was no mere myth. However, critics argue otherwise. They point out that much of the physical evidence could be faked or misinterpreted. Hitler's paintings, for instance, were widely distributed, and the ones found in Charlotte's attic might not have been personal gifts. The DNA results have never been formally published in a scientific journal, and skeptics believe they may have been misreported. French authorities after the war showed little interest in confirming or denying Loret's claim, possibly to avoid national embarrassment. Many historians dismiss the idea entirely, calling it a post-war myth that snowballed into legend. Others, especially in France, take the evidence seriously and believe it deserves closer study. To this day, Jean-Marie Loret remains the strongest known case of Hitler having a child. Whether he truly was Hitler's son may never be 100% confirmed. But the pieces of the puzzle from eyewitness accounts, wartime clues, DNA hints, and Loret's own tortured confession keep the debate alive. Even in death, Loret's story continues to haunt the shadowy legacy of Adolf Hitler. What do you think about Jean-Marie Loret's confession? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.